And welcome everybody to our daily space weather video 2 of 3. It's our fields and features section showing things like the Earth geospace. So here are the geospace magnetosphere movies for the past 4 hours. Magnetohydrodynamic pressure in the earthly vicinity here. Earth's magnetic moment from space over the past 4 hours. Fairly homogeneous magnetohydrodynamic pressure here. We'll let that play through a second time here, since it refreshed right at the end for your convenience. Yeah, these magnetosphere movies, they auto-refresh. So if you want to just watch this all day long on your screen, you're welcome to do so. It shows 4 hours of data per run. So we see a little reduction in magnetohydrodynamic pressure there. Next, we're going to look at the heliospheric current sheet and its polarity. Earth is in a south pole current sheet. We don't expect any changes to that coming anytime soon, although we do see a new sunspot group forming in the southeast. Here are the GOES magnetometers over the past 3 days, and we are seeing a continued high-speed coronal hole wind stream. Don't be surprised to see continued spiky readings in this, maybe even divergences from the readings from the GOES 16 and 17 as a result of incoming solar plasma. Here's the line of sight ecliptic plane field plot. You can see the sun's magnetogram there, as well as the current sheet from Earth perspective as opposed to the top view. And here's our coronal hole plot, very important for observing the progression of the solar cycle and solar polar field reversal process. Additional south pole oriented coronal holes here, crossing the equator, causing them to be known as trans-equatorial coronal holes. Here's a visualization of that, 193 angstroms, part of the ultraviolet light spectrum. You're looking at ionized iron, and you can see this fairly well-defined coronal hole here. It is south pole oriented. Next, our flare probability and detected sunspot groups graphics. Likelihood of major solar flares still quite high, especially as a result of sunspot 2941, a beta-gamma class sunspot group. It's got complex magnetic fields. They're capable of producing major flare, or being associated with major flares, we'll say, as correlation is not necessarily causation. So here's a close-up. This is sunspot 2940. You can see it's remained rather stable here over the past 24 hours. Next, we've got 2941. This is the most likely group to produce major flares, as I just said. I'll also show you the other major group in the southern hemisphere, sunspot 2939, the one that produced a possible Earth-directed coronal mass ejection. Yeah, there was a little bit of flaring came out of that, a little bit of ejecta. This is a sunspot group over here too. It's pretty minor, although it is beta class. And we do have another group having just formed back here in the southeast. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And when I say ion, pardon the pun. So this is the flare that we were talking about, I believe. It happened at 5:40 Universal Time or so. About 5:40 was the peak flux. It was about a 10-minute long flare of a C3 classification. No spikes in the proton flux, no relativistic particles have struck Earth yet. From that, let's look at the real-time solar wind. Again, the solar wind speed remains elevated here. We did just see a dip. We showed you the dip in the magnetohydrodynamic pressure. Solar wind speed has now dropped down to 464 kilometers per second. Solar wind density here quite diffuse at 4.66 protons per cubic centimeter. We also saw the plasma temperature drop here. So that's an indication of a subsiding of the current high-speed coronal hole wind stream. KP index is only at 1. That's a measurement of global geomagnetism, each bar representing 3 hours. Next, we'll show you 7 days of solar system forecast. Here's where planetary bodies are now. Here's where things will be in 1 week. Shout out to Mothra. Happy birthday to Mothra. Next, looking at a star chart. What's going on above your head? Well, if you use in-the-sky.org and you put in your location, you can figure that out. Hey, look, it's the celestial North Pole, known as Polaris, the star around which other stars in the northern hemisphere rotate. From the perspective of the Earth, which is spinning. Anyway, if you're up before dawn, you may see Mars and Venus and Mercury rising ahead of the sun. It's a planetary pileup ahead of the sun. That yellow line is the ecliptic, the path that the sun takes across the sky. And next, let's take a look at this coronal mass ejection associated with that C-class flare. The view from stereo A is the best view, but we'll also include the LASCO C3 located out here at Lagrange 1. So here's LASCO C3 on the right, stereo A coronagraph on the left. You see some incongruities there. The plasma is denser in some places than others, and certainly the densest portion of that plasma is off the Earth north-south line. So it's certainly most of the ejecta is going to be north of the planet. However, when we look at it from the LASCO C2, there is a bit of a halo. So you can see some ejecta here showing up on both sides of the coronagraph. So some of that ejecta would be Earth-directed. I would say most of it probably not. So again, there's that footage. And hopefully that clarifies things a little bit about the space weather for the day. One more video coming out, our bonus feature segment. Also, we put out a meteorology segment most days. Thanks for tuning in. Congratulations on realizing the channel exists, and may that solar wind be at your back.